Welcome to Kingdomize, the podcast, where we discuss how to see our lives and our world through a kingdom lens, how to infuse kingdom culture into our families, our workplaces, and our cities, as we all participate in the dream of Jesus to see his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. So welcome back to Kingdomize, the podcast. And you've noticed lately that it's not the four of us anymore. I'm just interviewing individuals. And today I'm here with my good friend, Bruce Mann, who is a guru in the area of kingdom leadership. And so these next 10 weeks with Bruce are going to be fantastic as we go deeply into one of our main kingdom pillars, the kingdom leadership with Bruce Mann, my friend. So that's amazing. Bruce, I'm glad you're here with me. This is going to be fun.
Right? Yeah, well, it's daunting, but let's do it.
We can do it. I believe together we can do it. And mainly what I mean by that is that you can do it, and I'll ask good questions. We'll see what happens. How's that?
Okay, let's do it.
So today, let's do this. So today, Bruce, we want to lay a foundation. In fact, that's what we're titling this, Laying a Foundation for Kingdom Leadership. And so I'm gonna go to you right away and say, set this up for us. Like, what does it mean to be a kingdom leader? And is that different than, like, why can't I just be a normal guy, a normal leader? That's good. Like, set this up for us.
Well, let me start by saying this is less about tactics and ways and means and more about the heart, more about why we lead. And so we're going to dive deeply into that over the next number of weeks as we explore where's the motivation, how do we understand our role as leaders. And all of us lead in different capacities. If we're friends, if we're fathers, if we're, have positions and jobs, we all lead. We have some area that we lead in. And so the real challenge here is for us to understand how do we lead from a kingdom perspective, a kingdom vantage point. How does that inform how we understand the world around us, the people around us, the goals, and all that? And so that's the deep dive we're going to do over the next number of weeks. And our challenge is that alignment, because that's really a purifying, an apprenticeship. It's it's a discipleship of learning to and understanding God's kingdom. I love to use a verse from 2 Corinthians 5 that talks about kind of our place in the world. And let me just read it, and then we'll come back and comment on it. But so from now on, we regard no one from a worldly point of view. It's interesting, that worldly point of view. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But though we once regarded Christ this way, we do so no longer. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he's a new creation, or new creation has come. The old is gone, the new is here. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them. And he's committed to us the message of reconciliation. So we're therefore Christ's ambassadors. And he's committed to us the message of reconciliation. Therefore we're Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. God made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, so that we might become the righteousness of God. Pretty awesome responsibility to hold that position in God's kingdom. And understanding that, I think, is really at the core of how we perceive ourselves, how we lead ourselves to lead others. And that's why it needs so many sessions, or a number of sessions, because this is an ongoing, developing, transformative process that is probably the biggest challenge of our lives, is learning how to be those ambassadors for Christ.
Yeah. Well, we're going to break that down today, Bruce, into 4 areas. that I want you to comment on. And again, we're laying a foundation for the course. So if you're listening today,
Yeah.
we're not going deeply on any of them, but we will go really deeply through the next few lessons. But we want to talk about specifically four things. We want to talk about kingdom lens, kingdom ethos, kingdom goals, and then finally, what does it mean to be a cultural architect? We've talked about this a lot in our other podcasts, but we want to go deeply in all those. So let's start with kingdom lens. What is a kingdom lens? Why does it matter? How does this work under leadership?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're both wearing glasses, right? We're seeing each other through a lens that brings some correction to our aging eyeballs. And so it's really how do the kingdom lens is this what we see things through, how we process, the lens that we see the world through. And to be honest, most of us, we're the sum total of all the influences of our lives, right? Our home life, the the culture of the country we grew up in, the home that we grew up in, the impact of various events, that anything from global events to local events. They could be triumphs, they could be tragedies that have shaped who we are. When I think back on my own life, there's so many events that took place that have shaped who I am, and they tend to create this lens that we see the world through. And that could be a lens of fear, could be a lens of criticism. It could be anything. It's often not helpful, but sometimes it is helpful. Our challenge isn't to, do we have a lens or not? We do. We all do. The challenge is it a clean lens? And is it a lens that allows us to see the world the way God, as to the degree we can, to see the world the way God sees the world? Because without that, we're not going to make good choices. We're going to lead from maybe motives that are not entirely helpful or are entirely pure, or if they're fear-based, or whatever the circumstance may be. So our big challenge is understand: do we see the world around us through a lens that is the lens that God desires us to see it through?
Yeah. So when I grew up, I got a pair of glasses from my family, and that's one lens.
Yeah.
I'm in Canada, so that's another pair of glasses. Or these are like I have all these filters on my glasses, right? I've got my family filter, my culture filter. I'm a Canadian. I'm a nice guy. A touch of insecurity because I have to be sorry for everything. But that's a lens, right? All these things are lenses. So my environment became what helped create these lenses. What I want to do is I want to superimpose or maybe even get rid of the other lenses to have a kingdom lens to see the world through. And is that work?
Yeah. So again, hopefully it's just an illustration or a visual that, pun intended, I guess, a way of seeing on how we process the events of our lives. And there are so many subtle influences that your birth order, did you grow up? So many things. We don't have time to go into it all, but I hopefully people get the understanding that part of our discipleship, part of Christ being formed in us, is the cleaning of the lens of anything that's not allowing us to see clearly and see accurately the world around us, or enhancing those things that actually are good, that are helpful.
Excellent. That's so good. And that, again, that leans back to what you read from 1 Corinthians 2:16-21. Like, we no longer see through these lenses.
Yeah.
Jesus comes in his kingdom. He comes and brings the lens of the kingdom to see both the world and the people through his perspective. Is that fair?
Yeah, very much. And one of the key points in that is, and it's going to be something that we'll touch on as we work through this, is that often we may have grown up in, say, a very authoritarian home, maybe a very authoritative father, and we tend to see the world through, this idea that it's about right and wrong. Do it right, you're good. If you do it wrong, you're bad, right?
Yeah.
And so it's getting the understanding of the lens that God wants us to see through, and recognizing that there is an understanding of God's kingdom that will guide us. Because and we're going to touch on this, but it's more about God desires us to be good more than He desires us to be right.
Oh, that's going to be really good when we talk about that. That's going to be really good.
So we'll get there.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So we've got the kingdom lens. We're seeing through the right glasses. We've cleaned our glasses or a whole new set of glasses, whatever we needed. So let's talk about kingdom ethos. This word that people love to throw around when you're talking. When you want to sound intellectual, people will use the word ethos. I know one Greek word. Here, say this. But what does that mean? What does it mean, a kingdom ethos? What does that mean?
Well, it's the spirit of the kingdom, right? The essence of it. What is the motivation? What's the driver of it? I sometimes I'll use the illustration. Everyone probably can quote John 3:16, right? It's, for God so loved the world, He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in Him should not perish but have everlasting life. Most people couldn't quote John 3:17, which is a binary verse with John 3:16. For God did not send His Son into the world to condemn the world, but that through Him He might save it. It's relational, right? It's restorative. And so under the ethos is the spirit, the essence of God's kingdom. God is not insecure. He doesn't need to continually, demonstrate that I'm right. I'm always right. I'm never wrong. That's a given. But being good is a choice in it. Yeah. We can some of the most correct people in the world can be the nastiest people in the world, right? Because they have to have this sense. I've got to demonstrate all the time that I'm right, that I've got it right. Being good is a different thing, and that's where this is where we start to unpack the ethos. The spirit of God's kingdom is different than the spirit of the world.
Awesome. No, that's really good, and I do think that's a significant piece to talk about, because, as you just said, and this will lead us into the goals of the kingdom, that some people feel that they can have truth without love, right? Okay, I got the right answer, but no one wants to hear it from me because they don't want to be around me. But I got the truth, so that's really good. So let's move then, because that's a great setup for that. Let's move on from the ethos then, the spirit of the movement, the motivation, to the goals of the kingdom. So let's take, and you talk about this all the time, so I'm going to set you up, because you talk about the difference between right, the legal moral filter, so seeing things through the legal moral filter, or being good. You set it up a few minutes ago, the relational restorative. What does that mean?
Well, I hesitate to use this expression, but it's sort of the difference between the Old Testament understanding of life and the New Testament. Some people may have some trouble with that. We can, they can feel free to email and comment. But if we were to
just send your cards and letters to bruceman at blah blah blah.
When we read through, for example, the Old Testament, we read a lot about the law, right? We read a lot about the rules and regulations for life. And most of the Old Testament is about, was the law being kept or was it not being kept? It was a legal, moral worldview. It was a way of, and the reality was no one could keep it. There was something greater. And we can go into the details and scriptural understanding and theological understanding of that. But it was a legal, moral filter that defined life for people. And in fact, Jesus enters into this world that is gone on steroids, and he finds himself constantly having to being confronted by the legal, moral, champions of the day, the Pharisees, and constantly being challenged on how he understood and how he engaged with people, how he expressed God's kingdom, because it seemed to not be, it almost seemed to push aside the idea of right and wrong, and he just engaged relationally and restoratively. And that was challenging the religious and people of his day, who had this filter that said, if you do this, you're right and you can join the club. If you don't do this, you're wrong and you can't join the club. And that was that legal moral filter. In no way is anyone saying, there isn't right and wrong in the world. There definitely is. But Jesus talks about this often. It's you can strain out the gnat and swallow the camel. There was the adherence to these minute and tedious laws, and what was being filtered out was justice and mercy and grace and reconciliation and restoration. And Jesus is focusing on that as a means to bring about right, but more importantly, to bring about goodness. And so I think this may be a bit of an oversimplification, but really what's happening there is that Jesus is saying, hey, I'm not saying these things aren't right. Nothing of the law is going to pass away. But what's important here is, how do we restore people? It's restorative justice. It's mercy. It's grace. And so he engages in the world in a restorative, relational way. And it's a good thing for us that he does.
Yes.
But now he says to us, do the same thing. Engage with the world in a restorative and a relational way. And the legal moral part, we'll get to there. That's going to happen. It's part of the process, but it's not the basis of engagement, of relationship, of mission. And so we see that it's where God's grace and his forgiveness and his empowerment through the Holy Spirit to help us live out lives that are actually pleasing to God in their essence, where we align ourselves to ethos again of God's kingdom, and then begin to be made right before God, but not on our own merit. So deep stuff, but really that's the lens again, right? Are we seeing it through legal moral, or restorative relational understanding?
Yeah. And as you said on the way by, there are two things on the way by that I want to just hit on as well. Is Jesus didn't come to abolish the law. He really came to fulfill it. And he did that relationally, right?
Yes.
The way to fulfill the law is relationally. So I've heard you talk often about Matthew 5, about you've heard it said, blah, blah, blah. I say this. It's like, let's add to the law all the relational pieces that you want to just make all these 600 laws so you can keep them, which you never will. But I want to add the major relational restorative filter to that. Is that fair?
Totally. And again, I love Matthew chapter 5, as you mentioned, is really Jesus beginning to unpack what is this kingdom that he's bringing. The Beatitudes aren't just nice, cute little sayings. They're expressions of what it means to engage in God's restorative mission. It's challenging. It's difficult. It's going to have some challenges and difficulties associated with it. And if Jesus does anything, he deepens the law, moves it from just simply outward actions to inward transformation. And so it's not about in any way saying the law isn't important. It's actually about creating an understanding and an ability to actually fulfill the law. And that's the transformative process, which is, I don't know if it's wrong to say that's going to be an eternal process for us. So.
The other thing I thought of while you were talking, when you differentiate between do we want to be right or good, or truth versus goodness, like when Luke wrote about what Jesus did in Acts, he could have said Jesus brought some great teaching, but he said Jesus went about doing good and healing all the oppressed, like and bringing health and peace, right?
Yeah,
This is what Jesus did. He just went around healing people, bringing his kingdom of justice and peace, right?
totally.
Which,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
I
Is
think
the
fits exactly
the
what
essence
you.
of God's kingdom is restorative.
Yeah.
And hopefully we embody that.
So, let's go a little bit deeper on this, the goals, because I think it's really important under what you've talked about. I've heard you talk about before about uh, how we bring the goals. Like it's not just about policies and procedures, and that the kingdom has different metrics rather.
Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you at a high level, if we look at the Gospels and we look at the ministry of Jesus, and obviously we're using Jesus as our great example of leadership, of what it means to lead in from a kingdom world understanding. He taught us to count differently. He taught us to tell time differently. He taught us to understand success differently. The nature of God's kingdom is so radically different from the world's kingdoms that it's not something you just sign up for and you're done. It's an ongoing process, and it has a mission, but it also has a method. And so both of those have to function together. We talk about kingdom. We often think about the fact that it's about the rule and reign of God. Let's say in all areas, but it's not
Yeah,
by force. It's not by compulsion. It's not by edict. It's about transforming people's hearts, and that's the redemptive process that takes place. And Jesus showed us in very clear terms how to do that, um, and and to actually begin to have an impact and change the world. Um, and our mission is, we go back to our 2 Corinthians 5. We are now
yes,
representatives of that kingdom, and our goal is to become those cultural architects that can begin to see the attributes, the essence of God's kingdom in our own lives, in our families, in our network of people that we associate with, congregations, our job, like everywhere. The kingdom touches everything.
yeah. Bruce, what a great segue you've just done. That was beautiful. We've talked about kingdom lens, kingdom ethos, and goals, and so we want to get to our last main point, which really is cultural architects. So it's
Yeah,
not just a matter of, okay, I'm seeing correctly now, and I'm thinking correctly now, and I know how to do it correctly now. I actually have to do something, and
yeah,
that's what we're calling cultural architects. So take us deeper
yeah.
on that.
Well, I would say in many ways, so we understand what an architect is. They design things, like they design buildings. They have buildings that have certain purposes. They have certain functions, and they create space and pathways and all different, and they're both aesthetically pleasing but functional at the same time. Um, and so a cultural architect is someone who basically designs communities, designs the ability to function together in a way that brings honor to God, glorifies him, exudes and exemplifies the attributes of his kingdom in powerful ways that are transformative. And so as leaders, if we're called to lead in any capacity, we are in essence creating a culture for the people that we're leading. But that culture has specific things about it. One of the concepts that I think fits in when we talk about being a cultural architect in God's kingdom is I'll call it a strategic inefficiency. A strategic inefficiency, meaning that because the metrics of God's kingdom are so radically different than the world's, it's going to bump up against some of the deeply ingrained things that we sort of have collected over the course of our lives. I mean, if you do any traveling around the world, you can see North America is obsessed with efficiency, with reducing time, with creating convenience, with making good use of our time, right? And we create all kinds of ways and means of doing that, which sometimes are absolutely comical, and then sometimes are just overbearing.
Yeah,
But the reality is, in God's kingdom, we tell time differently. efficiency takes a lower place to the personal development of people. It always takes more time to do the right thing. It always takes more time to nurture relationships, to help people grow and understand. If all it was just telling people what to do, well, that's efficient if they do it. But is that changing a heart? No. So we would say, policies and procedures they don't change hearts. Relationships change hearts. Impact, getting to know people, getting to understand, helping guide them, apprenticing them, discipling them. And so the idea here is that we have to adopt new metrics and new definitions of success in order to actually fulfill our kingdom mandate, because it's not going to fit all the time with the world. The world has we use different, you and I've had this conversation, we talk about a scorecard or a balance sheet.
Right.
In the business world, you have a balance sheet that says you're fiscally viable or you're not fiscally viable. It tells you what you have, your assets and your liabilities, and where you stand. Well, from a kingdom perspective, that's an important part of your business, but the relational balance sheet is as important. The spiritual balance sheet is as important. The environmental balance sheet is as important as the fiscal balance sheet. And you may, from a kingdom perspective, accept a lower profitability in one column to gain more profitability in another. But your metrics are different. You're not using the world system anymore to understand profit and loss. And so that's all part of this understanding of leading, understanding the values of God's kingdom and how they apply in business, in my family, in my life, in my church congregation, whatever the community might be. And in God's kingdom, He values people being developed as leaders, not just followers. Right. So what do we do? Are we actually creating leaders, other leaders, or are we just creating followers as someone who's leading?
Right. So tell me, Bruce, please tell me that one of the lessons you're going to teach on the way through here goes deeply into this, because I think people need to understand what a cultural architect is. What is a multi-column balance sheet in all these areas? I think. Tell me you're going to do that, please.
We are going to do that on a very deep level.
Excellent. Excellent.
And it's really fundamental to understand. How do we know if we're successful if we haven't defined success from a kingdom perspective, from a kingdom vantage point?
So that's perfect. And I think, I know we've seen how this has helped people in the church world, people in the business world, people in life, an understanding that it's okay. Like when we talk to business leaders, we want you to be wealthy. We want you to be rich. If God's aligned that as your calling, then we want to come alongside yes to that. But please understand that's not the bottom line. Isn't just that numbers, money numbers. There is bottom line that includes many other things. And so, can't wait to get to that and talk more through that. So this has been really, really good, Bruce. Let's park this puppy here. How would you want to wrap this up for today?
Well, I'm going to come back to this idea of are we more concerned about being right or being good?
Right.
Right. And I want to, there's a quote here from a Jewish writer named Viktor Frankl. Someone may be very familiar. He wrote a very powerful book about how vision carries us through. The things that we aspire to, that we're committed to, that we look forward to, are what really carries us through. He was a Nazi concentration camp survivor, and he processed his experience in a powerful book called Man's Quest for Meaning. It's a great read. Anyway, let me give you this quote, because we live in a success-obsessed world, and everybody wants to be successful. Primarily, that success is shown by what you accumulate, how much money you have, how much fame you have. All these, we put metrics on it, and we say, well, we're successful because. He makes an interesting point here. He says, don't aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you're going to miss it. For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued, it must ensue. And it only does so as the unintended side effect of one's dedication to a cause greater than oneself, or as the byproduct of one's surrender to a person other than oneself. Self-abdication, he's talking about. Happiness must happen, and the same holds for success. You have to let it happen, not by caring about it. If you want to listen to what your conscience commands you to do and go on to carry it out in the best of your ability, then you'll live to see that thing, that in the long run. In the long run, I say, success will follow you precisely because you've forgotten to think about it. Right? So what he's saying here is, if our pursuit is success, it's going to elude us, because by definition, it's going to cause us to value things that are not going to help us. They're not going to position us to really understand kingdom success. But if we commit ourselves to serving the master, so I'm going to end by just really quickly touching on a very familiar parable that most people will be understood, the parable of the talents. Servants who were given a charge of a certain amount and, told to, go out and manage it for the master. And we know that there were two who managed it well. They increased what they had by, doubled it, and one who didn't. I want to talk about the two that increased what they had, doubled what they had, and the results. It's interesting to me that they're stewards, right? So we're going to explore this idea of stewardship over the next number of weeks as we talk about leadership. But they weren't. We sometimes think, well, these servants got rich, right? They doubled what they had. The master says, "Hey, you did a good job. Bang, you're rich." It's not the case. They were actually given more responsibility, not more wealth in the conventional sense. But what they did get is that the master says, "Come, and enter into your master's happiness." Your master's, and in fact, in some ways, it could be interpreted, "Come and be a partner with me."
Yeah.
So the reward for their good stewardship was that they got to enjoy and participate in the joy of the master, in this case, our Father in heaven. That's the kingdom goal.
Yeah.
That we get to partner and identify with God's purpose and plan, which transcends any sense of earthly wealth. That's a given. I'm sure that they were well cared for.
Yeah.
But they got something greater than just earthly wealth and control and, authority. They got to know their master's heart and his joy at a deeper level. And that's our goal as kingdom leaders, is to so identify with our master that we begin to enter into that spirit, that ethos of who he is and what he's doing. And it changes how we see everything.
Yeah.
We're going to dive deeply into this over the next number of weeks.
Amazing. And really, as you're talking about the parable of the talents, it actually hits on all these areas we've already talked about. It does hit on the lens. So we want to start thinking like the master, the ethos, the spirit, like, this is my joy, my happiness. I want you to experience and live out of it. And then the goals of the master. There are expectations in the kingdom. There are goals and efficiencies that we want to hit. And then we do actually create, it's a combination between, you want to get 10 more talents, or one time he said, you've done this well, here's another 10 cities, right? So there's that ongoing connection to building the kingdom or being the cultural architect. So, man, that hits all of them. So, Bruce, this has been amazing. A great setup for what's going to be an amazing ongoing discussion about the pillars of kingdomization, specifically as we talk with you, Bruce, the pillar of kingdom leadership. So really, really good. Looking forward to the rest of these lessons with you. So thanks for tuning in today. Thank you for tuning in. Been great having you with us. I hope you've grabbed something, learned something. You probably have something to add to this conversation. We like having these conversations, but there's always things that people add to the conversation, and we're really open to that. So if something you heard today made you think of something else, I know that happens with me all the time. I'm listening to somebody and then go, yeah, but here's a point. Yeah, well, throw that into the chat on YouTube. Throw it in. Let's keep that dialogue going. And so we want you to do that. So again, thanks for tuning in today. Looking forward to having you next week for another great lesson on the pillars of optimization. Thanks for being with us today. Have a great week.
Thanks for joining us today on Kingdomize, the podcast. Let's keep the discussion going throughout the week on our socials or on our website, kingdomizeglobal.com. Contact us today to see how we can walk together to see more of God's kingdom in your city as it is in heaven.